I see you.
Okay, so let's start again with Andrea Berlin. Just a second, start video. And if you can all please mute your microphones.
Can we make this? Yeah, okay. All right, everybody. Thanks for your patience. Sorry about that. Technology, not our friend. My assignment here was to talk about Hyrcanus and Mount Gerizim. Okay, this is not advancing. It's not advancing. Oh, so what did you do?
I think now with the arrows it will work.
With the arrows, it'll work. Okay, so we're going to look at history and archaeology and interpretation. And we're going to start very quickly. This will circle back to Avner at the end, but we'll just start quickly with the text of Josephus. When Hyrcanus heard of the death of Antiochus, he went all around. And he took various places, including Shechem and Gerizim, and the nation of the Kuthians, who dwelt at the temple which resembled that temple, which was at Jerusalem, which temple was now deserted 200 years after it was built. Here are some words that do not appear either in Greek or in English in the text. These, with all due respect to all the many, many languages that all of us speak, I will just focus on the English versions of these words, knowing that in every language, every word has a penumbra of meanings and feelings and connotations around it, which is something that often as archaeologists, we don't pay much attention to when we use various words to describe our finds. So it is of interest to think that archaeologists are not the only ones who pick their words or don't think so hard about their words. Ancient authors sometimes did the same. So because Josephus does not use these words doesn't necessarily mean that these things didn't happen, but it is of interest that they don't figure in his account. Two other words that don't figure into his account are destroy and destruction. We will come all the way back to this point at the end. All right, now we will turn to the archaeology, and I should say here that except for 2 visits personally to the site, once with Yitzhak Magen himself leading a big tour of Reshutniks that somehow I got on. What I know about the excavations here comes from this book and the 2nd volume on the inscriptions. So Debbie tells me that the next volume is out any day, and it will be great to see it. And it will be interesting to see if there are updates and just additions, which I will have to presume there are. So everything I say is based on basically the account in this volume. Here's the plan of the site as it was excavated. And if you read through the entirety of the descriptions, these are the spots at the site where there's evidence of destruction on the ground. And what you see is that it's, I don't know if the word is random is probably not the right word, but anyway, it's certainly not as comprehensive. There is one area with absolutely no evidence of destruction whatsoever. This is area K, which is down here in where I've got Avner's head showing up here. Maybe I make this go away. You can see the north arrow. So this area K is, what is this, north, south, east, west, west, northwest. There's no evidence of any destruction here whatsoever. What there is in this area is a bit of a concentration of Hasmonean coins. And Magain concludes from this that it was in this zone that the Hasmoneans set up camp on the site. They're speaking of coins here very quickly. There were a lot of coins found at the site, including one very impressive silver hoard in corner of the one public building just to the southwest of the sanctuary compound. And here is a conspectus of all of the coins as we understand it from the preliminary report that I was using. And you see that the latest coins cited, this could be updated now for all I know, but the latest coins cited are of Antiochus VIII and Cleopatra Thea, 125 to 111. I will say that unless there are specifically datable coins to 111, 110, for example, autonomous coins of Tyre or Akko, this is a very big range, and it's not necessarily the case that this would support abandonment, destruction or abandonment in 111, 110, which is the general assertion, because nothing actually would need to be later than 125. But I'm not really going to engage on the point of chronology. I just wanted to give the example of what coins were found. In terms of destruction, how did it happen? You know, one of the things that we know with increasing clarity is that it's actually hard to destroy a place. It takes really a lot of effort. And what you need is something flammable, which is not stone. Stone is not flammable. You can't really set it on fire. What there were in most of these buildings were second stories that were supported by wooden beams. And there's a lot of evidence for this, not in the form of wood exactly, but in the form of the corbels that supported these second stories. Not every room had a second story, so not every room would have had wood to hand, but you see two nice examples here. One in area S up at the top where the corbels are all intact, and one in building K1 down at the bottom where the corbels have collapsed. A point I would just make here very quickly is that collapsing of corbels doesn't necessarily have anything to do with destruction, or at least not purposeful destruction, because obviously there is no evidence for destruction in area K, but the corbels have all collapsed. But my point here is there was wood in a lot of these rooms, and that had to have been what was torched for any acts of deliberate destruction. So what does the destruction look like on the ground, and what can we tell about the places that the destruction that we have it happens? Sometimes it does seem to be both targeted and opportunistic. So here in the entry gate of the southern quarter, just in this one spot, and there probably were wooden doors here, and that's probably what was set on fire. In a number of the houses or the domiciles or the buildings in area A, there were thick layers of burning on the ground and charred beams and heavy deposits of soot. And these are all rooms that probably had second stories, and they had easily accessible wooden beams that could be set on fire. But one of the things that you can see even from here is how precisely targeted these destruction episodes are. The great majority of the rooms in area A don't have any evidence of this at all, or at least there weren't any reported in the volume that I had. Another clearly targeted and also opportunistic point of destruction was the eastern entry gate into the sanctuary. You can see the burning of the stones, the paving stones. And again, here, there were probably large wooden doors. There are sockets for the doors on either side. And so it was the doors that were set on fire. So there certainly, despite Josephus not talking about it, is evidence of destruction and its companion verb to destroy. Let me go back to the other set of words that I invoked at the beginning that don't appear in Josephus's text, because I want to make a point about an interesting semantic difference between these two sets of words. Destroy and destruction can be done on your own. Siege, attack, battle, fight, and conquer, take two. Those are words that imply confrontation with somebody else. You besiege somebody, you attack somebody, you do battle and fight with somebody. When you conquer, the presumption is that it's personal. You conquer people, which may or may not include destruction. So when we choose to use these words that do not appear in historical texts, in the historical accounts, we as archaeologists are adding a layer of interpretation to the evidence on the ground. And the question about the evidence on the ground is, can we tell anything about whether there were two parties involved or just one? Because that's the difference between finding destruction and identifying an attack, a siege, a battle, a fight, etc. So what was not found, or at least not reported to have been found? There's no defensive wall at the site. There were almost no weapons. Personal valuables and piles of household goods are largely missing, and there were absolutely no bodies. These, in fact, are all points that Yitzhak Magen also makes in his report. What was found were block streets, what Magen calls reinforced roof areas. I'm not actually sure what that means, unless it possibly means building up the sides of walls to make a kind of defensive perimeter on a roof so that the roof is not open. There weren't any illustrations of anything like this, so maybe that's what it means, and maybe it means something else. There were sealed doors and windows, and in many places there was a seemingly conspicuous number of ovens and large storage jars, which Magen interprets as evidence for a long siege and people having piled into the site from elsewhere, from the wider region, and needing supplies. Although the buildings in which the ovens and the large jars were found are also public buildings. And of course, this is a pilgrimage site. This was a site where crowds and crowds and crowds of people came regularly, and you would need to supply them. And it's also a site with no water source. So you would always need a lot of jars, and you would always need supplies of water. Okay. So that's a list again of what was not found and what was found, and the various words that we bring to bear. And I just want quickly to give two examples that most of us are familiar with of other sites with some of these things not found and found, that had other events of abrupt end or termination events, you might call it, to illustrate that it's not always straightforward to decide the difference between these categories. So the first is the very well-known site of Gamla, which we are sure was the subject of a protracted siege and a couple of deliberate attacks. And were archaeologists today to excavate this site without having any historical testimony whatsoever, I think we would probably figure this out, mostly because there are tons and tons of weapons found in almost all of the rooms. There's armor, there's ballista balls, but there's also just a lot of weaponry found there. And there are, in every room of every house, all the household goods that suggest that people's lives were stopped in their tracks, stopped at a moment. We don't see either one of these things at Mount Gerizim. At the site of Kadesh, which also has a kind of abrupt termination event, in room after room after room, we found intact vessels. We found pretty much no real valuables, but we found lots of things that people left behind as if they left in a hurry. Again, if we had absolutely no historical testimony, and we don't have as much historical testimony for Kadesh as we do for Gamla, I think we would probably figure out that people left in a hurry. We would not presume there was an attack, and there's no evidence that there was an attack. There's really no burning of the sort that we see at Mount Gerizim. So in other words, we do use the remains that we find, often are able to use them without historical testimony to assess the character of how life ends at a site. But in the case of Mount Gerizim, it's not as clear cut as it is in the case of Gamla and at Kadesh. As archaeologists, we try to reconstruct what happened. That's how we go about our business. But another larger goal is to characterize the intentionality of what happened. It's not enough just to say that this happened. We're actually also interested in the larger context and the whys and the wherefores. In other words, we're interested in what the takeaway is, what the message is in terms of what happened at a place. And for that, the remains of sporadic, scattered destruction in some rooms at Mount Gerizim is not the most telling of the categories of remains to help us characterize what happened here and the intentionality behind it. For that, we want the inscriptions. There were 384 fragments of inscriptions found at Mount Gerizim. All but 5 of them were hacked into very small pieces, small enough that even a person as small as me would be able to pick up a number of these blocks. And that was no small feat, because these blocks were not standard inscription blocks. They were wall blocks. They are all thick ashlars. Their surfaces are unsmooth. They still carry their claw chisel marks. They're not polished, as if they were meant to carry an inscription. They have ruler lines that you can see were drawn on them. And the presumption of Magen and Mizgav is that these were blocks that were built into the walls. They were part of the precinct walls. And people could pay carvers to write for them, to craft an inscription for them on the blocks of the precinct walls themselves. So you have to imagine, here I have outlined the wide, long, and presumably very high, originally, Western precinct wall of the sanctuary. It's extremely large. It's extremely large. 384 inscriptions sounds like a lot, and it is, but there must have been hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, over 1,000, couple thousand wall blocks. So in order to get these blocks out and hack them up, there had to have been a very comprehensive, deliberate program of ripping down the walls in order to be able to get at the dedication blocks and hack them up. The comprehensiveness of this far outstrips the evidence for burning here and there across the site. The comprehensiveness of this is something, actually, that we can imagine because we have archaeological evidence of something quite similar in Jerusalem. So what happened here? Looks like initially people probably came from outside the area, from the surrounding area, and they took some refuge, the additional ovens and the jars, maybe some of the additional walls that are built in to divide up some of the rooms in the houses were to accommodate all of these people. And they take steps to withstand an attack. They build barricades in the streets. They block the doors. They block the windows. But they don't stick around for an attack. They leave rather than fight. And when they do, they take most of their goods with them, unlike Kadesh, where people fled in a hurry and left everything behind. Here, these places were pretty nicely emptied out. The large jars are a lot of trouble to take and breakable, so a lot of those were left, but there are very, very few items in the way of personal goods or valuables. When Hyrcanus' soldiers arrive, there's nothing to stop them. They move in. They set fires here and there. But their major target and their major goal is to purge the sanctuary of meaning. With concentrated intensity, they dismantle the precinct walls and they hack apart hundreds of large, thick blocks that carry dedications. The aim is not per se destruction, it is dismemberment. They aim to dismember the sanctuary, to wipe out any chance of its being remade. And they aim to send a message to those who had worshiped here and who now live scattered across the region. Yahweh is the only God, and Jerusalem is his only place. So, of these words, I would say that we have no evidence for siege or attack or battle or fight or conquest because we have no evidence for two parties here. We only have evidence for one party here. And I would like to end in the opposite way that archaeologists sometimes do. We often start with texts and then we look to see how the archaeology either affirms or contradicts the text. But here, my question is, do the archaeological remains tell us something about the account in Josephus? Because from the account in Josephus, not only would you not know per se that there was destruction, you would have no sense whatsoever of the character, the caliber, the scale, and the intentionality of that destruction. Is Josephus's account just too late to take this in? Is Josephus's source uninterested in these details? Is Josephus whitewashing what Hyrcanus does? Does he not see it the way some of us would see it today? This is a case where archaeology and history together can lead to a lot of interpretations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. That was very interesting. And I'm unsharing my screen.
Stop share.
Thanks. So,
We're trying, maybe there. We're trying to find you guys.
yeah, so today something is really wrong.
They're there.
Okay.
Do you want me to share it?
Debbie, are you ready?
Yes, I am. I'm waiting for you.
Great. Can you share?
Yes. See. Wait a second. Let's go to the beginning. But now I don't really see Zoom. Okay. So, is it shared?
Yes.
Yay.
But now I am trying to. Are you seeing it in what kind of view?
With the little slides on the left. You need
Not
to
good.
go to-
Okay.
Okay.
Now,
Great.
מצוין.
Now we see slideshow.
my God, now I don't see anything. Wait a sec.
I see a beautiful, beautiful view of the Jordan Valley.
Wait a second. No. But now, I'm trying to see. Just a second. Hide. One minute. I am seeing you. Roy,
Wow.
this is the only thing I am seeing.
Okay.
Just a sec.
Sometimes, Debbie, it's sideways, like if you go sideways, you might be on mirrored.
I just wanted to see it. Okay. Okay, everybody is seeing the presentation?
Yes.
Okay. So I regret we haven't spoke before, because if I knew what you were going to talk about, I could have made a kind of very different presentation, because actually I dealt with all the things that you are talking about in Beit She'an. But anyway, Beit She'an was a second. Okay, so Beit She'an, or what we call Nisa Skytopolis of the Hellenistic period, actually seems to include two tells. As you can see, there is Tel Beit She'an or Tel El Husan. On the picture, you can see it on the left, on the right side of it. It's the smaller one. Actually, this is Tel El Husan and this is Tel Istaba. Both are flanking the Tel Harod stream, the Jordan Valley, the Jordan Valley is an area that has many, many, many sites, and they are, in general, occupying the areas that are close to water springs or water sources. The area was dug with many, many, many expeditions. We will start a brief summary of the expeditions in both tales, and then we will get in more detail into the Telit Tava, which is the excavation that I was part of it. So first of all, we have Tel Beit She'an. The first excavation was on behalf of the Museum University of the University of Pennsylvania, directed by Clarence Fisher, Alan Rowe, and Gerald Fitzgerald. They were mostly interested in the biblical periods, so the Hellenistic, Roman, Byzantine, and so on were dug in a way that is very difficult to understand what they found there. The publication of it included also very, very few remains, some plates talking about the Hellenistic period. We have some pottery plates, a hoard of 20 silver tetradrachma of Ptolemy II, the head of a beautiful statue, as you can see on your right corner. And that's it pretty much. Another thing that is worth mentioning is the Roman temple, because below or in the nearby area of the temple, they found also some Hellenistic pottery sherds and also some coins. After that, there was a small excavation on behalf of the Hebrew University, directed by Gal Yadin and Shulamit Geva. And then in what we call the Beit She'an project, in the 90s, there was a huge project that was part of the immigration policy. They were trying to give work to the 1 million Russian Aliyah. So there were a lot of sites that were largely dug. Some of them are like Tzipori, and the other one was Tel Beit She'an, and it was a joint expedition between the IAA and the Hebrew University. Ami Massar took the Tel, which of course was more close to his interest, and Professor Yoram Tzafrir and Gideon Ferster, on behalf of the Hebrew University, dug in the lower city, in the Roman Byzantine Arab city, and also an expedition directed by Rachel Bar Natan and Gabi Mazor on behalf of the IAA. And during these excavations, part of the project was to dug also Telis Tava. So now we will get into the areas of Ami Mazor. There are two small areas that are relevant to the Hellenistic period. And again, I must say that he dug 2 or 3 areas. In most of the areas, he didn't find any remains of the Hellenistic period. The Hellenistic period were mostly restricted to area P, stratum 5. It had 3 different phases that included domestic dwellings, courtyards, but as you can see, it is actually something like 3.5 squares. So let's take that into consideration and remember that when we are doing reconstructions, we should be aware also of the amount of 3 squares is a kind of small area to make very, very important interpretations. Yet, the excavations were dug in with modern tools and in a modern way, and they result in 3 different phases, as I said, and they led to 2 different interpretations, and we will get back to this when we'll speak about it later. The most important things that I can say here is that they found in the 3 phases pottery dating to the 3rd, 2nd century BCE. Later, it is mostly 2nd century BCE. And Barbara Johnson, who actually published the results, she mentioned some sherds from the dating to the 1st century BCE, to the Hashmonean period. Donald, who is here, and probably he will be able to develop the idea, published the coins. I must say that most of the coins are, okay, there are coins from the Ptolemaic period, from the Seleucid period, and also there are 4, actually 6 coins that are datable to the 1st century BC, to the Hashmonean period. However, Donald that did a very thorough investigation, and he context again, he dealt with it, and he actually understood that most of the material that came from secure loci are to be dated to the second half of the 3rd century BCE. That includes stamped amphoras and coins. Now we will move to Tel Itztaba. We just said about the people that dug there. There is a new expedition there in the last years, and we will get into each one of the excavations. Okay, so the excavations in Beit She'an of the IAA, directed by Rachel and Gavi, included several areas, as you can see, area W, area N, area O, T, M, and H. What they uncover is are the remains of a city constructed in an orthogonal plan, including public buildings, as you can see in front of you. These were found mostly in area Z and area O, and a residential quarter in area W. So if we speak about destruction, you can see the pictures in front of you. the shelves that were falling down and the plates in motion, actually still in motion, the wood from the shelves, the amphoras, all the houses in this area were burned. So briefly, and I added it actually after I heard Andrea's lecture, my MA dealt with the positional processes and household archaeology and behavior archaeology, and my test case was actually Beit-She'an, the houses of the Hellenistic period. I wanted to understand how people left, if they left, if the houses were destroyed, if they were preparing, if the house was prepared to deal with all this situation. So as you can see, this is one of the houses. This is the plan. Wait a second. On the first part, you have the ground floor and the first story, and you can see the different actually group of vessels that were found. Happily in Beit She'an, it's a very, very dry area, so we had the bins of the roof of the ground floor and the first story, and the person that dug was a supervisor that started as a biblical archaeologist. So he drew exactly all the vessels, where they were found, in what position. We had also, as you can see in the, okay, this is the opposite, I'm sorry. The upper one is the first story, and the second one is the ground floor. And you can see on the ground floor, the remains of
Wouldn't that be the ground floor because of all the jars?
רועי,
Loom weights, Debbie.
loom weights, תודה. Of a complete weight, actually, we had the weight, we had the beans, and the loom weights, we had two of them. For example, we had also jewelry that was spread on the courtyard. We had seals inside one of the storage jars on the first floor. We had figurines, we had coins, we had a lot of things that when we first looked at it, we didn't really understood what this deposition is saying to us. So I try to look around, and what we can say is that we have a large number of large and small restorable and complete vessels. We have large amount of fine wares found in the house. We have jewelry, coins, bullion, figurines. The largest number of vessels appear in the debris of the second story. Large storage vessels have been found lying opposite in the wall, intentionally turned down, as you've seen the amphoras that were turned down and waiting for being reused. No corpses were found. No blockage of entrances or cancellations of some of the rooms were identified. And what we can say is that the factor refuse of Unit 3 at Elitz Tava do not reflect activities indicative of normal everyday patterns of life, but rather unusual preparation of storage activities and how storage activities are related to warfare situations, as Andrea described them. They kind of has something to do with people preparing the houses, waiting for something to happen. And if I have to make comparisons to modern times, you just have a lot of bottles in order to just storage water and food when you know that somebody is going to come and attack your house. So in a way, as I understood it, it has to do with the story of the days before the conquest or before the abandonment. It tells the story of people that were kind of preparing themselves for what is going to happen. And on the other side, all the little things that were thrown away in the way, they actually tells us the story of the day that people left and leave money and jewels on a run. So it tells two different stories that are, or two different moments in the story that are related to the destruction of Nisaskitopolis. And some of the finds, because I cannot deal without them, so you can you see the amphoras, and you can see, and I brought the beautiest of the pottery vessels, as you can see, and on the left side you can see one of the bulla burnt that were inside one of the storage jars. And just a second, and all this episode happened according to the inscriptions on the stamp amphoras that Gerald published actually already, and the numismatic material and the pottery, it is pretty well dated, about 108, 107 BCE. So we associate it with Hyrcanus conquer. Last are the German-Israeli Telitz Tava excavation project, which I think I've seen Achim here in the public. So it's a co-joined expedition directed by Achim Lichtenberger and Orenthal, and they have been dug, I think, like 4 small sessions. And you can see most of the things were for Byzantine or Roman, and only in 2 areas, areas C and D, that were more close to area Z of IAA, resulted in Hellenistic phases or strata. And I think these are the green ones in the green walls in the plan on your upper side. Another thing that they are, one thing that they are contesting the IAA results are concerning the walls, and I will be glad if Achim can say something about it after that. I understand that Walid Atrash and Gabi Masor understood Area H as part of the Hellenistic wall, and I understood that Achim and Oren do not agree today with that. So I am trying now to put together all the things. Many people made historical reconstructions of Skytopolis. It is recorded in gladly. It is recorded in many textual evidence and inscriptions, and I believe we will deal with it more with Avner. I just want to bring two and mine or our settlement reconstruction of Nisa Skytopolis. According to Ami Mazar, Tel Beit She'an and the remains he had in the Tel Beit She'an was occupied continually from the 3rd to the 1st century BCE. Tel Itztava and Tel Hussan can be part of the same city or two twin cities settled on both flanks of Nahal Harod. The foundation of the city by the time of Ptolemy II started at Tel el-Hussan, based on the silver tetradrachms coins and stamped amphorae. Only by the beginning of the 2nd century BCE, the city expanded to the other flank of the river, to Nisa Skytopolis. In area P, he actually associates the three phases with the 3rd, the 2nd, and the Hashmonean phase. One thing that is important to mention is that in Beit She'an, the depositional picture is kind of different of what we've seen in Tel Itztava. In Tel el-Hussan, the last phase is like a it reflects an abandonment process without pottery for restoration, very few sherds, but yet we have to keep in mind that we are talking about 3 squares. On the contrary, Donald Ariel, who just actually studied and analyzed every and each one of the coins and the stamped amphoras found in Ami Mazar and in the Pennsylvania excavations, and he came up with a different reconstruction, which I tend to agree with. All the stamped amphoras were uncovered in Area P, and most of them date to the 3rd century, mostly to the 2nd half. Half of the stamped amphoras from Pennsylvania came from the area of the Acropolis in the nearby area of the temple. The distributional pattern and context where the coins and the stamped amphoras were found might suggest that the 3 phases should be dated to the 3rd and maybe to the early 2nd century BCE. And of course, at Tel Itztava, most of the stamped amphoras date to the 2nd century BCE, which fits the picture that we see in Tel Itztava site. So according to Donald, the city was founded around 260 BCE, and it included domestic dwellings, but also maybe a temple, which I think I can agree with. The settlement in its majority, if not in its entirety, moved to the other flank by the beginning of the 2nd century BCE. And the pottery, which I reanalyzed, tells actually the same picture as Donald see. I haven't seen any Hashmonean pottery in Ami's report. And actually the pottery dates to the late 3rd and 2nd century BCE. As you can see, historical reconstruction were written and are still written. Nice Skytopolis is a strategic place, and it's recorded in a lot of textual evidence, and that's why actually Nice Skytopolis did receive a lot of attention, on the contrary of a lot of places that did not. So we will skip the textual evidence of the foundation of Skytopolis, and as you know, many authors nobody agree with nobody, so there are many ideas about it. But what is relevant for us are the mentions of Nice Skytopolis and the different stories about how the inhabitants of Nice Skytopolis reacted and behave in this fervid and not quiet half a century. So with this, I think I will pass over Avner, that can actually try to make some sense between Josephus and the archaeological record, which I think it is possible to do. It can work together in a way.
Thank you so much, Debbie. And we're moving to our last speaker, Avner Ecker from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Avner, are you ready?
I think I am.
Okay.
Can you see my screen?
It's coming? Yeah, we see it now. So the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. And you hear me well?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So first of all, thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Debbie. And thank you, Roy, for inviting me this evening. What we have here is somewhat of we have a conflict of sources, of course. We have the sources that come from the literary source, Josephus alone, that speaks about the conquests of Hyrcanus. And we have these amazing archaeological finds from all over the region from the end of the 2nd century BC. Showing all these places were destroyed or abandoned and so forth. But this is not in 100% accord with the Josephine text. What's more interesting is also looking at current research or the last 30 years, is that the archaeological view has taken precedence over the literary source, so much so that in 2012, Israel Schatzman put it and said, the Josephine chronology of the conquests of John Hyrcanus has to be completely abandoned and thoroughly revised in view of the evidence accumulated in numerous archaeological finds discovered in excavations around Israel in the last 30 years or so. And while, as I put on my archaeologist hat, I appreciate this view, and it's fantastic that archaeology has taken such a leading role in understanding historical events, and it's as it should. It seems that a certain liberty has now been taken with the Josephine text, while the text itself is, and here I'm expecting some pushback, but it is not as difficult or not as complex as it's been made out to be. And it's been made out to be by people better than I mean, starting with Bezalel Bar Kochba, who claims that it is one of the most difficult texts or pieces in the Josephine account. And of course, I should take that seriously. And I took that into consideration when I came in to read the text or reread the text for this evening as my assignment. My assignment was very generally drawn, as in deal with the Josephine text. So I went and dealt with the Josephine text. Okay, so coming back to our text. So the texts of the Conquests of Hyrcanus I, according to Josephus, it's very funny to say because there is no other literary source describing the conquests of Hyrcanus I. Okay, sometime in the 13th book of the Jewish Antiquities, once Simon is murdered, Josephus is departing from his source in First Maccabees and starts to engulf another source, maybe Nicolaus, probably Nicolaus, but not only. And here he narrates the stories of Hyrcanus I, and this is what we have. And until the archaeology came in, this is also what we had. So part of this exercise for me was to read what was said about this text before the archaeological finds were discovered. So I went over to Shirer and see what he had to say and what the revised Shirer also had to say. So this gave me some sort of a perspective other than my own. So if one reads the texts in Antiquities and in the Jewish War, one gets the impression that all of Hyrcanus's conquests were done in the aftermath of the death of Antiochus VII Sidetes in 129, apart perhaps from the conquests of Samaria and Scythopolis. However, archaeological remains, and this perhaps should be said, are unanimous, in which destruction layers, abandonment layers, and so forth pertain to a time span around 113 to 106 BC. And of course, we can fine tune this, and I don't intend to go into that. And this is under mostly under Antiochus IX, Hyrcanus, and that was specifically in our area from 113 onwards. And this is, of course, not the first. What we're going to do is not the first attempt to reconcile this archaeological evidence and Josephus. Perhaps we should, of course, note that Dan Barage did it on the merit of coins, and Gerald has done it on the merit of his monumental work on the chronology of Rhodian amphorae stamps, and there are many others. So what I will say today may have already been said by someone, and I just didn't read that right someone. So I approach this exercise a bit differently though. I anticipate pushback, I told you. And honestly, this text seems more straightforward than I imagined or remembered. More importantly, it's true that in order to understand our sources, we must view them through a so-called corrective lens. That's okay, we have to understand it. But at the same time, it is our commitment that this lens will make as little correction as possible. Okay, we want to, just like we don't want to force our ideas on an archaeological site, we don't want to force it on a text. All in all, in this case, perhaps a single sentence in the Josephine narrative should be viewed with some suspicion in order to settle the debate. Proving that is a greater problem, of course. Before we discuss the relevant paragraphs pertaining to the Josephine account of Hyrcanus's conquests, I wish then to lay out two principles that accompanied me while reading and writing about Josephus. Okay. And these two principles are, they are manifested time and time again when one studies the histories written by Josephus. The best, okay, so the first one is Josephus is true to his subject, i.e. the Jews, okay? And doing so, he avoids writing the histories of other peoples and going into broader subjects, but he does not invent events, okay? He may omit events that deal with other nations. And the best example I know of this first principle is from the second book of the Jewish War, the 17th of Antiquities, where Josephus relates the division of Judea following Herod's death. According to Josephus, Herod's heirs and other Jewish emissaries gathered at Augustus's council for the ratification of the king's will and redivision of Judea. That's nice. This was a crucial meeting that decided the fate of the land for centuries to come. And Josephus wrote this based on the eyewitness report of Nicolaus of Damascus. And in this decision, there is the division of the land. Archelaus gets the kingdom and so forth. But also, suddenly, the cities of Gaza, Gadara, and Hippos are detached from the kingdom and added to the province of Syria. And when you read Josephus alone, it seems like, okay, there was some sort of spontaneous reaction from Augustus who decided this. But with some luck, we also have the equivalent piece from Nicolaus preserved. And there he specifically states that there were emissaries also from these cities in this meeting. And here we can see that, and they demanded freedom from Jewish rule and convinced Augustus to do so. So Josephus omitted all reference to the presence of others, Gentiles and so forth, thus creating a false notion that only the Jews and the emperors decided the fate of Judea, and that Augustus, perhaps out of favor for the Greek polis, decided to free them. So, and this is an example that is pertinent to the history at hand, and as it revolves around the relationship between the Jews and the Syro-Hellenic cities, whose voice is muted time and time again by Josephus in favor of highlighting Jews and Jewish hegemony. The second principle, perhaps less pertinent to our story, what happens to the Jews happened to other peoples, okay? But may help a bit. This principle is a staple among Roman historians, perhaps ever since Fergus Miller used it in writing his Emperor in the Roman World. I also want to say that, like the pirate code, if you want, these are, of course, just guidelines, not much more. Okay, so after this preamble, I turn to the narrative of Hyrcanus's conquests as it appears in the 13th book of the Antiquities. The parallel narrative, written first in the Jewish War, is much less detailed, and it will be referred to only when necessary. Okay, let's begin. So, what do we have here? We have passage 254. Hyrcanus is joining Antiochus Sidetes on his campaign to Parthia. This is after Antiochus had lifted his siege from Jerusalem and corrected the relationship with Hyrcanus and so forth. We see this in 2 or 3 sentences in Josephus. This is a huge campaign, well documented in ancient sources. They needed to recruit many locals and many people for this campaign. It was an attempt to rekindle the Seleucid Empire. And of course, we see nothing of that in Josephus. So, but Sidetes died there in Parthia in 129. It's a devastating loss for the Seleucid Empire. They lose Babylon. Yeah. And Hyrcanus, with his eyes on the ball, seized the opportunity and raced against the cities of Syria. Okay. So, as soon as he heard about the death of Antiochus, and the translation is kind of a mix between my understanding of the text and Marcus's translation in the Louvre, marched against the cities of Syria, thinking that he would find them as they indeed were, empty of fighting men and forces to protect them. Okay, and here we have somewhat of an amazing detail, because he anticipated the cities to be empty. Why? Because levies and recruits were taken from all the cities of Syria. Okay, so what happened that when Hyrcanus joined the Parthian king, he wasn't alone. Antiochus, he wasn't alone in joining him. All the cities in the region had to give their forces up for this campaign. And of course, we get this only in one sentence here, and he did well to recognize this. Then, okay, while racing to conquer the Syrian cities, he started his fight of all places against Madaba. Okay, and that region, we don't really understand why it's against Madaba. My hunch is because he's coming back. Maybe I don't think he was in Jerusalem. I think he was on campaign, so maybe he's coming back, and something is blocking him from the east. I don't know, but oddly enough, he's fighting against Madaba and then some other cities in the region. Obviously, there is some larger story here that is omitted. Okay? I don't know which one it is. Maybe it could be gleaned from other sources that speak about this campaign and its aftermath. And then he goes on to say that he continued on and to catch Shechem and Grizim, and the Cuthian people that lived around the temple built similarly to the temple in Jerusalem, the temple that Alexander entrusted to the Sanballat, the governor, let's say, to build for Manasseh, his son-in-law, brother of Yadoah, the high priest, as we related before. And indeed, Josephus earlier in this in his narrative describes not only the building of the temple earlier on, but also has a long section in the 13th book about Samaritans and Jews Also an episode in Egypt where each had to present his case for being the true or the real religion for that matter, and which temple was more important than the other. So this is a theme throughout the book, and it is important for Josephus to mention it, and then and then he adds the sentence marked in yellow. Okay, this is the one that so it happened. Sunebe, it's impersonal. That this temple was laid to waste after 200 years. Okay, Genesta Eremon. And this sentence does not appear in the parallel account, in the account of in the Jewish war, and it seems to be kind of an afterthought, something that Josephus is adding to the text, and perhaps this is the most suspicious sentence, okay? Because we have here perhaps some sort of telescopy, some sort of epitome on behalf of Josephus, and after this he goes on to describe Hyrcanus's conquests elsewhere. But first of all, it's important in this section to say that as a whole, while describing the conquests of Hyrcanus, Josephus is laying down the foundations for us to understand where did Hyrcanus's power come from. So it came from seizing an amazing opportunity, okay, understanding that the Seleucid army is in chaos, the Antiochus VII is dead, and he can race back to Syria and capture all these cities. Okay, he had an amazing opportunity at hand, and this is one of the sources of his power. Okay, so and then it says that he captured Adoa and Marisa, destroyed, not anything like that, cities of Idumea, and after bringing the Idumeans underhand, yeah, literally, yeah, he allowed them to stay in the land, as long as they would circumcise and would be willing to conform or somehow to the customs of the Jews. So out of love of their fatherland, they submitted to the circumcision and practiced the other same manners of life as the Jews. From that time on, they continued to be Jews. This is not a destruction. This is not an abandonment. This is a capture. Yes, now Hyrcanus and his people are boss. He may have put in a garrison there, but according to the text, at least, this is not a catastrophe in a physical sense. Now there may be whitewashing, there may be many other things, but as far as the text goes, these people who agreed. Now we know there are exiles that go to Egypt from Idumea, and of course we know that Marisha is destroyed, but not in 128 or 27 BC, okay, or not in the 20s, okay. Now, so then after establishing that Hyrcanus seized the moment and captured the cities, he then goes on to explain other bases of Hyrcanus's powers, okay, while he talks about the renewal of the treaty with Rome, an important renewal because the backup of Rome, as many people before me said, is one of his sources of power, and of course it's something that is more than necessary for him. He then goes on and describes the internal struggles within the Seleucid kingdom, and there are many in this period. Okay, and his take from all of these internal struggles between Alexander Zabinas, Demetrius II, and so forth, is that, and as often happens when you have to deal with usurpers or contenders, is that the Seleucids prefer to or feel the necessity to deal first with their own internal strifes, and then they leave. They put a note in Judea and say, we'll get around to it. And in this get around to it, okay, Hyrcanus lives in peace and makes a lot of money and stops paying tribute to the Seleucids. Okay, so he is gathering money and power while the Seleucid Empire is being weakened. Okay, so this is why this section is in here. And then this goes on also between Antiochus VIII and Antiochus IX, but then Antiochus IX, Hyrcanus, sets his sights on Judea and the surrounding regions, especially after 113 BC, when this is the area that is left for him for operations. And here there is this Hyrcanus that is not paying tribute, is not paying taxes, and of course there is some reason to go after him. So when, however, Hyrcanus is openly damaging Hyrcanus's land, as is done, and so Hyrcanus is aroused to action and shows his own intentions. This is a difficult passage, I must admit. We have to know exactly to whom each one is sentence is referring. And Hyrcanus and Antiochus the Ninth are actually in somewhat of a direct conflict in the land itself at the end of the second century BC, or the last decade of the second century BC. This is also the time, the other way. Josephus explains how Hyrcanus shows his contempt to both the brothers, actually, but he begins. This is the time where Josephus starts telling us about the conquest of Samaria, and Samaria is besieged, and this is in response to the infringement of and according to the text, it is in the casus belli, is a response to the infringement of the rights of the people of Maresha. Now, about this sentence regarding the Marishenoi being apoikoi and being colonists, which is odd, there has been a lot written. And there are generally three strands in scholarship. One is accepting the possibility that indeed the people of Samaria harassed the people of Maresha, and then we have to deal with the term colonists and so forth. And the other option is that there are people of Maresha that are now colonists in Samaria. And of course, there are those who decide that the text doesn't say Maresha, it says something else. Okay, the place name is wrong. Now, if you just take the text as it is, and considering the fact that the people of Marisha are now Jews, it seems, or at least officially, according to the text, okay, it seems that the people of Samaria acted as proxies for the Seleucid king and were sent to trouble the people of Idumea. Here it seems that Hyrcanus, at least officially, is setting out to protect what could be conceived as his client city in Idumea. One can't ignore the somewhat Roman, maybe Roman terminology of apoikoi, right, as in colony, but we can find a solution for this term, even if not today, but it is not necessarily colonists in the classical Greek kind of way that in which it was interpreted, for instance, by Batzalel Balpov. So I would read it as it is, and saying, okay, the areas under the control of Hyrcanus were harassed by people that were sent out from Samaria. Especially if there was no direct confrontation yet. So he goes out and besieges Samaria, and then Hyrcanus intervenes personally. He brings in Egyptian soldiers to ravage. He comes to the aid of the city, but is driven back to Scythopolis, and the siege is then, and they run after him up to Scythopolis, and the siege is then renewed on that, and then at the same time, 6,000 fighting men from Egypt are sent to the aid of Hyrcanus, and he invaded and ravaged Hyrcanus's territory like a brigand while this siege is taking place. Who are these Egyptian men? What are they? I mean, there are several imaginative solutions, but I will not go so far as suggesting them. But at this point, however, it's important to note that it is not, and so Josephus tells us, it is not Hyrcanus himself that is running the siege of Samaria, okay, but it is his sons, okay, and this is of course, another indication that some time has passed between these first conquests and his second conquests. So, then the sons of Hyrcanus run the campaign, and they arrive twice at Scythopolis, okay? So after Hyrcanus falls back, he leaves two commanders, these Callimandrus and Hippocrates. The former died, and the latter ran up to Scythopolis and gave it up to the Jews upon his retreat. Eventually, also, Samaria fell. Josephus only speaks one more time about Scythopolis as a town belonging to Alexander Jannaeus, and said by the time that Jannaeus arises, then to power, then Scythopolis is his. There is another later source in Georgius Sincillus, the geographer, that speaks about another reconquest of Scythopolis at the beginning of the 1st century BC, but then it's a 9th century source that we don't know exactly what it's based on, so we won't deal with it now. So what is the narrative that comes out of this story? Okay, Antiochus, in the big picture, because it seems as if there could be something like too close of a reading of a text, okay? In 129 BC, Antiochus Sidetes dies in battle against the Parthians. Joran Hyrcanus the first seized the opportunity to rid himself of the Seleucid yoke and captures cities, especially Grizim and Marisha. Hyrcanus the first solidifies his base of power by renewing the treaty with Rome, left alone by the Seleucids for circa 14 years due to internal power struggles in the Seleucid kingdom, and around 113 BC, and this could be debated because the sources about Antiochus IX, other than Josephus, are very scant in general, okay? Turns his sight on Judea once more, perhaps instigating yet another revolt. And here we have a story untold, something omitted, okay, that may relate to the decision of the non-Jewish cities in Hyrcanus' realm, okay, and instigating a second wave of war. This time the campaign is managed by the sons of Hyrcanus, who's no longer a young man. Okay, but we are left with spare parts, okay? The temple at Mount Gozin is said to have been destroyed in the first wave of conquest, okay? And here, however, we are basing this on a single sentence. And it's one thing to reconstruct the entire body of these paragraphs and saying that no, it all happened at the same time, or moving things and shifting things around. And it's another questioning how much can we trust a single sentence that appears in one of two versions of the event. And it is quite possible that that sentence is an add-on or something that is giving a more general view and not necessarily a chronological view. And then, of course, we would have to settle this with what we see in the archaeology. Okay, the text does not mention the destruction of Maresha, and we see a Maresha that is generally destroyed. So, what do we do with it? Well, regarding Sunebe, we discussed it, and the destruction of Maresha, there may be a long story omitted here. There may be maybe the people of Maresha raised again against Hyrcanus. Maybe it has something to do with the activities of Antiochus IX, who is ravaging the land in the area, in the territories under Hyrcanus's control with Egyptian soldiers. Okay, there is something here that indicates that there may be other scenarios other than just discarding Josephus and saying everything happened around 110 BC. And of course, we can fine-tune that. So the story is more complex simply because we don't know, and archaeology gives us a better perspective. So the conclusions. The narrative according to what I see, the narrative given by Josephus in Bellum Judaicum is deliberately condensed, and it is difficult to draw chronological conclusions from it. However, it maintains the same relative chronology of events as Antiquities. The narrative in Antiquities is well structured and detailed. Josephus, being true to his subject, omits details pertaining to non-Jews. There seem to be events that are omitted from the Antiquities narrative, the actions of the people of Samaria against Maresha, and perhaps a general uprising of Syrian cities against Hyrcanus once Antiochus IX Cyzicus arrives on the scene around 113. The date of the fall of Mount Gerizim given by Josephus is wrong. Okay, it's okay. Okay, this may be due to an editorial decision to leave out most of the 113 events or due to a mistake. It is all based on a single sentence. And then a careful suggestion follows. The wars instigated in 113 BCE or around that time onwards are those that are manifested in the destruction layers observed in the archaeological records. Whatever other conquests that Hyrcanus had earlier in his first phase either left little mark or were erased by the later, more violent activities. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
I'll
Avner.
stop share.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we are very late in time, and I'm extremely sorry for that, but we will have time for very few questions. So please, if any of you have questions, please raise your hand.
You can do gallery view.
Hi.
Yes, Debbie.
Hey, thank you, Avner. I have some questions. First of all, in the first session, when we discussed Marisha, if I understand correctly, if I remember correctly what I did and what Ian said, and what we resume is that Marisha wasn't really destroyed, it was abandoned.
Correct.
So that's one thing. The other thing, I have a question for you concerning Nisa, because according to what you read, they actually betrayed the inhabitants of the city, and he gave the city to the Hashmoneans for the sake of money, if I understand it correctly. So if that is so, it doesn't work well with the archaeological record, because in Nisa we do have a fierce destruction and eventually abandoned and not reoccupation by the Hashmoneans. So that's one question. And then I read in Gavi's article that he said that in other place, the city that Josephus said in Bellum Judea 166, the city was captured in war and did not surrender. So there are like two different versions, actually. So it fits the not surrendered. It doesn't fit the gave it without fighting. What do you suggest?
Now, this is the beauty. I think that the answer to what exactly took place, or as far as we can tell, of course, should come from the site itself. It is possible for a city to surrender and to be given up for money, and then for soldiers to come and burn it down to the ground. I mean, not everybody is nice. And on the other hand, something that is captured could be abandoned. I mean, the actual process of the takeover, if we have archaeological evidence, it should tell us what happened.
Actually, it can also say tell about two different events. Maybe he surrendered, and after that it was taken by conquest or something.
And there is an event in, if we followed Georgios Sinkilos, that in around 96 or 95 BC, Hyrcanus takes over Skytopolis once again.
There's nothing to be taken over.
Yes, so we can say that here we can decide what to do with that source, but the idea is that the sources I would like to see the sources completing each other, giving different aspects of the same event, and if we say that Marisha was abandoned, then maybe then we have to say, how does this work with Josephus? And the main point is really that the tendency to also the people of the literature people had in the past decade to just take this Josephine account and crumple it and throw it to the garbage, should be avoided now, because we are less blinded by the archaeological discoveries that are amazing, and we shouldn't just lead into one side or the other, but rather try to synthesize. That's...
Thank you. Gerald and then Ian. But please
Yes,
keep.
I'm really
You're
sorry that it took so long to the people to speak. And okay, anyway, Marasha was not destroyed. Somewhere, I don't know where, Amos Kroner, the Zichrono Livracha, said that we have sign of destructions. It was actually a room with a huge tabboon, and these are ashes from the use of the tabboon. So, and it's logical that Marasha was not destroyed because never mind how he says this, but there is a negotiation, and we have the proof later on in the wars that actually the Idumeans who accepted to get closer to the Jews because they were not that far remain Jews because they come to Jerusalem during the civil war of the Jews before Rome destroys the temple. So that's the only thing I can say because there are many things to say. I just want to say that I corrected myself and this has an impact on the article I wrote in 1998. Chronology is important, and chronology. I changed the chronology, and things are fitting better for Garizim. I read that the coins are dated from 125 to, I don't know, 110 something. I would think that it's rather close to 125 because he started to get rid of what is not right, to make it short. And then he went to negotiate with the Idumeans, and then he went back to put a siege. It's written, it's a siege to Samaria, and send his sons to take care of Scythopolis, two cities which were Macedonian, I mean, Seleucid and so on. So I'm sorry, I defend Josephus. That's all I want to say. I accept him.
Thank you.
Not 100%, of course, because some things are not very clear. But anyway, that's already too much I said.
I have just a few things to say. Number one, I think that the 112-111 date for the abandonment of Marisha is pretty clear, based on coins, based on the last sealings, based on Gerald's lead weight, tomb inscriptions, etc. So I don't think there's really any debate in terms of what was the end of Marisha, you know, as I would say, the Hellenistic city. The other point I want to make is completely in a different direction, but very interesting. We found at Marisha many of the caves, many of the entrances of the caves we found blocked. I don't think it's the same reasons that you have it at Gerizim, but it's interesting that we have lots of entranceways that were deliberately blocked, not by debris that was dumped in, but deliberately built walls that were put up in many different, I would say, in at least 50 different sites around the Tel, in the different subterranean complexes. Along with that, and then it's the last point I want to make, is that we found that there was deliberate destruction in different areas. I'm not saying the city was destroyed, but in terms of, well, 9 cultic niches were deliberately damaged. We found the remains of that. One altar was completely smashed. Next to it was a small libation bowl that was also deliberately smashed. So these are things that I think are consistent with what happened in Gerizim in terms of the Hasmonean policy towards pagan populations, even though, again, the Idumeans are similar to the Judeans and will eventually convert. I still think that, let's say, the pagan influences were seen as abhorrent to the Hasmoneans, and actions were taken against them, at least what we can see physically at Marisha.
Okay, we'll take 2 more questions. Yes, Michael Girardian.
Yes, thank you. I just have a little remark. Numismatics is an important matter for all of this, especially for reconstructing the big picture of such events. Hyrcanus was not alone in a desert place. At the time, he was conquering many cities and many territories. There were 2 Seleucid armies and 1 Lagid, Ptolemaic army together. And if one take the time to just verify the last coin used in each of the destructed places by Hyrcanus, it is clear that a shame is appearing. I mean, I have the feeling that Hyrcanus chose a party in the Seleucid brother war, since the last coin used in each place was a coin of Antiochus the Ninth, and not the 8th. It was the case for the Mount Gerizim, for example. The 3rd volume of the Mount Gerizim excavation, published 3 years ago, made this appearance. So just, yeah, it was a remark. It is important, I think, to place the conquest of Hyrcanus in such a big picture in the Hellenistic world, and not only on some conflicting neighboring. Thank you.
Thank you. This actually joins to what Avner tried to say, right? That this is part of an inter-Seleucid war.
I think so.
I think that absolutely. I mean, it is the appearance of these actors on scene. I mean, that instigate Hyrcanus into action, either by joining a side, like Michael just suggested, and I did not think of, and that the cities themselves joined the side, and by doing so, they revolted against Hyrcanus. Anyway, there is a bigger story at play. And while I was reading, I mean, it was also, I was kind of thinking that maybe it was, one may even suggest that what we see in 112 in Marisha is not necessarily Hyrcanus.
Not
Necessarily
necessarily
Hyrcanus.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to come?
Yeah, but then people can see you and it's weird.
Hi, I just want to add one comment to what Ian said, and touching upon what Andrea said about Josephus not mentioning the destruction of Mount Gerizim. So first of all, I think we're talking about two different scenarios in Gerizim and Marisha. And here I'm walking in the footsteps of Danny Schwartz. So Josephus comes to he says the temple was laid waste after 200 years, closing a circle that Avner mentioned, like that he opened at the beginning when he mentions the conquest of Alexander the Great and the whole issue of the building of the temple. But John Hyrcanus, as a high priest, his legitimacy is from the religious aspect, and his subjects have to be under the realm of his religion. That's why he insists on the temple, and the temple is the main issue there, and this may be connected to the smashing of the inscriptions and all the issues related to the temple themselves. That's very different from the Idumeans. He cannot use the policy of converting the the Kuthians, because they are Israelites. That's the main issue. So it's a struggle about who are the real Israelites and where is the center of power. So the center of power and the center of religion, according to Hyrcanus, have to be in Jerusalem. That's why he insists on the destruction of the temple. And Maresha is a different story. That's a different nation that he brings under his wings, under the religious wings, but it's very different from the Samaritans, who are Israelites, who are circumcised. He cannot convert them. So that's just one point I wanted to raise.
Thanks.
One could make the point that many of the practices of the Idumeans were very, very similar to those of the Jews. One could say that let us say, the symbolism of those acts, we don't know what the symbolism was for the Idumeans, but many of the things that the Idumeans were doing, they were actually doing, in some cases, before the Jews. Okay, whether it's ritual bathing or whether it's puncturing vessels, these are issues that we could perhaps debate, but nevertheless, circumcision, we assume they were circumcised, whether we're looking at the biblical text in Jeremiah or whether we're looking at the physical remains of X amount of circumcised phalli that we've discovered at Maresha. So I would say that, yes, it's different than Hyrcanus, but there are certain similarities in terms of the populations.
Thanks, Ian. Okay, we'll have to finish now. Our next meeting will be in April 1st. We'll have Danny Sion and Christelle Fisher-Bovet, and we will discuss War of the Scepters. You are all welcome. And thank you for joining us today. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Roy, can I ask you a question?
Thanks.
Somebody have a question?
Yeah, Becky.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't wanted to know how long Uzi's here. Sorry, of the room. I didn't mean to interrupt everyone. Hi.
How are you, Vicky?
I'm good. How are you? Welcome.
Still on my feet. I'm here till the beginning of May.
Great. Okay. That's all I needed. Thank you. I haven't seen anyone practically this year except for Andrea, despite being on campus. But okay, great. Just wanted to make sure you were here for a while so I could.
Yeah, I'm in Cambridge.
Great.
River, but close enough.
Yeah, okay, very good. So I'll be in touch. And thanks all. Andrea, can I ask you a question too, since you're in the room? Sorry, I know everyone needs to go, but do you know of other examples? I thank you so much for your paper. I was working on saying there was no destruction at another site at the same time, and I wrote down your list and have already putting it in. Are there other examples that you know of where the destruction or the sort of desanctifying of a space is so clearly concentrated on inscriptions?
Oh, well, no, because we don't have any other examples.
Yeah, okay, that's what I thought. Yeah.
But I will say that, the little shrine up on Mitzpeh Yamim gets its final truncation under the Hasmoneans and, under some group who come up there and go into that little shrine and they, for example, take all those bottles that were dedications and laying on a little altar and they snap the tops off of all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And the juglet, we found almost 100 vessels there and very few of them were intact. They were all broken in a very particular, deliberate way, like,
yeah.
And you can just imagine a few people schlepping up there and doing this in a targeted way. And by targeting the dedications of people, you are doing something very visceral to the practice of belief and worship.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. Okay, it's something, it's kind of going on my list of fragmentation. I like deliberate fragmentation, so it's helpful for me to think about different ways of approaching it. Okay, thank you. Well, thanks all. Thanks, it says Roy, no matter who is sitting there, but thanks everyone in the room. I'm sorry I couldn't come in today, but I'll try to come on April 1. Looking forward to it. All right.
That'll be great. We serve food.
Bye. Thanks. Bye.